Welcome to the Pastors Academy podcast, and I'm your host, Reverend Kevin Knox. Every week, an experienced pastor shares their best practices, power habits, aha moments, and hard lessons learned in ministry. If you like the podcast, you might also appreciate the insightful discussion that we have on a Facebook group, the Pastors Academy. Today, we have Pastor Quincy Stratford. He has been in the ministry for over 20 years, and in 2010, he and his wife co-founded Carmel Friendship Church. They have since grown into 3 worship services and beginning construction on a new facility. Today, Reverend Quincy will share some of the hard lessons learned in pastoring and growing a church. Pastor Quincy, I'm grateful for both you and your wife in your ministry.
Just as far as my wife is concerned, my wife and I were saved together.
Oh, neat.
And so we both were saved together almost 20 years ago. We went to our first church together 20 years ago, probably in the next month or so.
Wow.
So she's been there with me the whole time.
Bless you. You're a lucky man. Okay, let's get started. I wanted to ask you a question. As pastors, we often struggle with finding that perfect story, joke, or illustration to kind of make things galvanized in our congregation. Do you have a favorite story? Or let me rephrase the question. Does your congregation have a favorite story or anecdote or joke that you have shared?
Quite a few. A lot of them. I probably say one of the best ones. This weekend I shared at our church where my wife and I, we relocated from Dallas, Texas to Tampa, Florida. And when we were moving, the moving truck came, packed up everything. And then my wife and I drove. She drove one car, I drove another car. And she had my son, who was at the time, he was about 8 months old, with her. And I had the 2 girls with me. And on I-10, there was a jackknife trailer, jackknife tractor trailer. So we were stuck on I-10 for 2 hours. But in my head, on the map, I said, we've got to make it to Mobile, Alabama. I was right beneath Mobile before we stopped. And we got into a heated discussion over the phone. And every time we move, it tests your love for one another. And I called her, and my son was in the back seat just screaming and hollering at the top of his lungs. And so when we finally made it past the accident, and she said, well, I don't care what you do, I'm going to the hotel. And I was upset. I was hot. And so we get to the hotel. We find one. We go to check in. And as I'm checking in, they ask for my debit card. I swipe the card. The card says decline. And so obviously nobody wants to get that card declined, especially in a moment like this.
Oh, no.
It's embarrassing to get your card declined. And so it's the middle of the night. I'm swiping again. It declined. And I said, I know I had the money in my account. And so when I logged on, mobile banking was new then. I logged on and I looked in the app. And I was like, I got the money here. And I showed the person working behind the desk. And I said, I got the money here. And it's kind of unconcerned. And I could see the money. I just couldn't access it. And I kind of told them that's the same things oftentimes how it works with God. I didn't let the bank know that I was going on a travel notice. So they restricted me. Once I was getting gas in Louisiana, they thought somebody had stole the card. And so I let the church know that oftentimes that's how things can happen. If we step outside of certain bounds, we can restrict our blessings and access them.
I like that. That's good. I like the way you bring that in.
Yeah.
Now, you've been in the ministry for 20 years, so I know you've had some good times and probably some bad times. Can you share an experience that was really, really difficult for you, or a mistake that you made or something like that?
The most difficult experience had to be when we started the church, because I was a store manager for Walmart, and we moved down here. Never intended to stay in Florida. Dallas was our home, and we moved down. I believe it was on the 26th or the 28th, no, 26th or 24th of April 2009. And on May the 4th, I believe, in my prayer journal, just a few weeks later, that same year, I remember writing in my prayer journal, Lord, I think you want me to start a church, but that can't be true because I don't know nobody in Tampa. And so we still had a house in Dallas. We were going to move back to Dallas.
Wow.
And so starting the church probably was the most difficult thing that we've ever done I mean, it really tested us, and we really experienced a whole lot of, numerous trials upon trials upon trials. So it was, if people, people talk, wow, we started church and everybody got saved and so many people came to Christ. Man, it was ugly for so long, and it was like the worst thing. And I think it didn't start taking shape until year 3. And that's probably because I had my own wrestling with God, because I really didn't want to do it. And so, it was really a Jonah moment for me, because I really wanted to go back to Dallas.
Oh, okay. Jonah moment.
It's my home. I'm good here now. I love church now.
So this is the same church that has now grown to three worship services.
Yes, sir.
Wow.
Yes, sir.
Well, good. That's been less than 10. That's 10 years or so almost, and that's quite a bit of growth.
Yeah, we're in an office building, so we have some space issues. We can only seat like 160. And so we've kind of, our building has kind of hampered us a bit. So that's why the construction process is so needed.
Congratulations. What tidbit of advice would you give to somebody about starting a church?
Just make sure you're called. Make sure, I've seen people start churches because they want to preach. It's not worth it.
Yeah.
I never really wanted to start a church. And I guess because of all my responsibility when I was a store manager at work, carrying the weight of everything, I compared that to the weight that my pastor was carrying, or my pastors carried. And I think, wow, you want it, but you don't want it. And so if you're going to start a church, I would just say, make sure you have a good friend and read as much material as you can, but don't get discouraged when it doesn't go the way that, church plant superstars say it ought to go.
Okay. That's good. Your church has grown considerably. So what have you done to promote the discipleship among your congregation? What's working for you in terms of church growth and discipleship?
I would probably say the main thing is that we started out, we didn't have a choir. We didn't have a children's ministry. We didn't have music ministry. And so we just started out with the word. And so I would definitely say expositional preaching has been probably the bedrock of our church. And so with that, even with on Wednesday nights, we started about, I want to say 3 years ago, just going through the Bible and on Wednesday nights. And man, we had a good time in Genesis, and believe it or not, we had an excellent time in Leviticus. And so, I would say that, and then just and then now other things have started to add on to it, and so it was the bedrock of the word.
Okay. Well, with all the other things not distracting you, it's probably a good thing to stay focused on the word. Mm-hmm. And if you can make Leviticus exciting, congratulations. It speaks well of you.
I loved it. I mean, and then we tied it into Hebrews and the sacrifice of Christ and the importance of it. The Lord gave me new eyes. It took me years to love it.
Good for you. Okay. What was your hardest adjustment about becoming a church pastor? What was so hard for you in becoming a church pastor?
When we left, I had to, the Lord kind of put on my heart that I had to leave Walmart and come to the ministry full time. And so my wife and I, we've moved 9 times just since we've been here. Mm. And some of those moves have not been good. So the adjustments of having to downsize, having to move and move again with 5 kids, that was probably personally, that was a difficult adjustment. That one thing I struggle with is realizing that people don't belong to me, people belong to God. And so oftentimes you foster relationships and you want to keep people a certain way or certain positions, but I struggle. I had a close person who started with us on the couch, and I knew the Lord was telling him to leave. I had to tell him the truth. I said, the Lord has opened up a door for you. I think you need to take it. And then ultimately at that time, he was like one of the most faithful. That was real tough.
Okay. All right. So Quincy, let me ask you a question. What have you learned in pastoring a church that you wish you had learned in seminary?
Well, most of my seminary training came after the fact.
Okay.
So I learned a lot about pastoring, being a manager. And so I kind of, I struggled when I was in Dallas because I actually moved to Dallas to go to Bible school and go to seminary. And when it wasn't happening, I was frustrated. And Reverend Moore probably gave me some of the best advice I ever received. And he told me, he said, Reverend Stratford, he said, God trained Moses on the backside of the desert. he trained David in the wilderness and in the sheep pen. He said, God might be using Walmart to train you for the ministry, so don't get frustrated. And I realized that I'm in seminary now.
Yep.
I think seminary gives me a lot of good informative information on how to put sermons together, how to study, how to research doctrinally. But what I learned in Walmart in management and dealing with people, different personalities, and all that comes along with that was the real good practical side of it. If it would have been in reverse, I would have a lot more challenges than I have now.
Okay.
Like that. So I look at seminary sometimes thinking, and I see I'm thinking, no, that doesn't work in the real world.
Basically, you're saying Walmart has taught you some people skills?
Definitely.
Okay.
Definitely. And I've worked in some difficult stores. And with difficult people who are not shy about holding their tongue. So definitely it helped me a lot.
Well, good, because working with people was sometimes the hardest part of the ministry. So
it can be.
What are you doing now in your ministry that you wish you had started doing sooner?
We're setting up better systems.
Oh.
And so we're setting up better systems, getting better communication, realizing now that it's just too much for me. And so we brought on another full-time person. And so I would tell anybody, systems, organization, communication, and structure is very critical. It's key. You need it.
Can you give us an example of maybe a system that you're setting up?
For instance, like right now, we've adopted Realm as our church management software, which has allowed us to communicate within the ministries with the different ministry leaders and events and outings. And so that has helped out a whole lot.
Okay.
And then even with the set point of trying to set up ministries and who's going to be over that particular ministry, org charts, we have a thing we call PD, position descriptions, as it pertains to what's expected of the leaders over a certain position and what they should expect from the volunteers, and putting expectations in place and just trying to get leaders, period. People think every pastor I talk to, that's a constant struggle. It's like, man, I don't have any leaders. So no matter how big the church is, I realize that that's just something that you're going to have going on.
Something that someone taught me in terms of asking for volunteers or leaders or whatever is never make a pulpit announcement saying...
Doesn't work.
Well, it makes it sound like the job is not important. And we're just looking for somebody to teach the third grade type of thing.
Yeah.
The best thing you can do that's more edifying to the congregation is actually tap somebody on the shoulder and say, we know you have some skills. Would you be kind enough to help us with this program or something like that? But a personal approach is much, much better than standing from the pulpit and saying, hey.
It doesn't work.
Yeah, I hear you. Everybody's business is nobody's business. So
exactly, it doesn't work. So we're trying to work out a way that does work. I don't know why we keep, but it doesn't work.
Okay. Some quick questions here. What's the best advice you've ever received?
The best advice I've received was, you're not as good as your best day, and you're not as bad as your worst day.
Oh, that's a good thing to keep in mind. Yeah. Yes. Good. And what is your favorite quote?
My favorite quote is probably that. I probably tell myself that constantly. Honestly, as pastor in the ministry, you have a whole lot more bad days than people realize. And so to know that I'm not as bad as my worst day has been a constant assurance to me.
It keeps us humble too. That's good. All right.
Yes.
And do you have any particular advice that you'd give your fellow pastors?
Just enjoy where you are with God. To me, there's so much pressure to be concerned with what somebody else is doing. In the Christmas season, I'm seeing churches paying off $22 million worth of debt and giving away cars and all this stuff. I said, man, that's great. Then if you're not careful, people will have that expectation of, well, how come you're not doing this? Or how come we're not doing it? But I'm thinking that's not what we are. And so I've become comfortable with just accepting my limitations and where God has me. And it helps me to celebrate other people's victories better and just be content with where he has me.
Comparison can be our worst enemy sometimes.
Yeah, contentment is bliss.
One final question. Do you think that pastors have a particular enemy or danger that we should be aware of?
I think so. I think that if we're not careful, I read a quote somewhere in a book, which Leadership Pain, which was, I would recommend any pastor read it, because I read that last year and it really helped me.
Say that again, Leadership Pains?
Leadership Pain by, I think it's Samuel Chan is his name, or Francis Chan. But in his book, he says that for every 100 people you have 10 devils.
Oh.
And so there is always a potential that somebody's there to antagonize, scrutinize, not for the right reasons. And It took me a while to realize that some people actually don't come to church or grow closer to God. It caught me a little green. It took me a while to figure that out. But once I figured it out and I realized, so I think that we have opposition, like when Nehemiah was building the wall. It's easy to have discouragement, which turns into opposition from within. And then you have those who are on the outside who don't want to see God's kingdom advance, who are always, whatever the accusation is, in particular in the African American community, there are certain things, that we deal with as it pertains to, dealing with the Black Hebrew Israelites and stuff, and questioning the authenticity of Christianity nowadays. And so having to reassure, our people, there is, Christianity did not start in America, and, it's been around for millennia.
Yeah.
Our God has been around forever. That's what eternal God means. So, yeah.
I like that. Very good. I appreciate your feedback. Thank you for sharing with us today. And if you're a guest to this podcast, I ask that you subscribe, because when you subscribe, you also make it easier for other pastors to find this podcast. Next week, we have Pastor Ryan Stratton. He will be sharing the success of his daily routine, what he thinks should be taught by every mentoring pastor, the best advice he ever received, and other golden nuggets. See you next week, and may God continue to bless you in your ministry.